Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. 2021 is finally over. So I thought I would try and analyze a little bit my reading for the year. So I put together a few stats, which I hope you guys are gonna enjoy. I try and go a bit in more depth than what you perhaps normally see. And I'm also gonna mention whether I have any goals for 2022 for any of these metrics that we're gonna look at. So let's get started. In 2021, I read 52 books, which works out exactly one book per week. And I promise you, it's not something I deliberately targeted or anything like that. It just so happened at the end of the year that I hit 52 for 19,500 pages. 52 books is actually the most I've ever read before. And I guess it's because having a booktube channel really helped me being consistent. Previously, I would have had times, some weeks sometimes, where I wouldn't necessarily read. Whereas I would say since I started the channel, I've virtually been reading every single day. In terms of goals for 2022, I do not have and I do not want a goal in terms of number of books that I want to read. As long as I enjoy what I'm reading, I'll be happy with any number. If I end up at 30 books, it's fine. If I end up at 70, that's fine. I don't really care. I don't want the additional stress of having a number where I might be behind schedule and then might sway me towards picking maybe shorter books because you want to read, you want to hit a certain number. So I really don't want to worry about that. Almost 3/4 of the books I read were ebooks, which you guys probably know is my usual preference. And a bit more than a quarter were physical books. Also, a bit more than half, 54%, were books that I owned, and 36% were books that I borrowed, typically from the library, but it could also be my official book pusher, Bob the Bookerer. And then 10% were ARCs that I received from publishers. Again, I don't necessarily have any specific goals here. I have really good self-control when it comes to spending money, buying books. I don't really buy books unless they're on sale. I use the library quite a lot, as you can see, so I'm happy with this. It's not something that I'm gonna have a specific target in mind for. My average rating for the year was 7.6, so just shy of 4 stars. And you can see here the sort of distributions, the distribution of my ratings. So you can see that most of my ratings were 8 out of 10, so 4 stars. And as I mentioned before, it's a bit of a default rating for me. If it's a book that I like and appreciate, a solid read, but not necessarily a new favorite that is going to stick with me for a long time, for me, that's an 8 out of 10. And that kind of makes sense to see it reflected here. And you can see that I'm way more stingy with my 10s out of 10s. There's only a handful there. And 9s, kind of somewhere in between. So clearly quite a few books I was really impressed by. And then not as many, I guess, on the other side of the curve. You can see between 4 and 7, relatively few. And only one DNF. The average length for the books that I read this year was 374 pages, and the longest book that I read was The Count of Monte Cristo, or almost 1,300 pages, and the shortest book was Box Hill, which was actually the very last book I read in 2021, 120 pages. And I also wanted to look at the kind of breakdown in terms of how many books I read based on the number of pages. So I have 3 different buckets: short books of less than 200 pages, 250 pages, medium-sized books between 250 and 500, and long books over 500. So you can see that almost 30% were short books of less than 250 pages, 46% were medium-sized books, and then 25%, so a quarter, were long books of more than 500 pages. I also was curious to look at the ratings that I gave to these different buckets, and long books and medium-sized books, they're the same at 7.9, whereas short books, which in my mind I typically prefer, actually have a significantly lower rating at 6.9. So it looks like I've been enjoying longer books more than shorter books, even though I typically always feel that I'm intimidated, that the more intimidated, the longer the books are. So that's interesting to see. And the most popular is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, with almost 2 million people having shelved it on Goodreads. And the least popular is Dinner Party, a Tragedy by Sarah Gilmartin, who's an Irish writer, and that's only been shelved about 1,000 times. Then I looked at the gender of the authors that I read from, and this is not something that I ever remotely worry about. I would never think, oh, I want to read more by female authors or male authors or anything like that. Something that I just don't really care about. But it just so happens that I finished the year exactly 50% with 26 books by male authors and 26 books by female authors. And also interesting to see that the average rating that I gave to books by female authors was slightly higher at 7.9 versus 7.3. Not a massive difference, but slightly edging it. You can imagine, as I just said, I don't necessarily have a goal in this respect for 2022. If it stays at 50-50, I'm happy. If it tilts 60-40, 70-30, one way or another, I'm okay as well. If it really goes like 90-10, then I will start worrying about it, but I'm pretty sure that that's not really going to be the case. Then I looked at the genres of the books that I read, and here I'm looking at number of pages rather than number of books, just because some genres like fantasy and historical fiction have much higher average number of pages per book, so I thought this would be more representative. And my most read genre is fiction, so general or literary fiction, if you like, at 31%. And then fantasy just behind at 21%, historical fiction and sci-fi both around 15-16%, and thrillers 12%, with non-fiction only having 5%. Again, I wanted to look at the ratings per each of these buckets, and you can see that fiction was my average rating as 7.6. Same goes for fantasy, again 7.6. Historical fiction was higher at 8, and so was non-fiction at 8, while sci-fi and thrillers were slightly lower at 7.3. So not a massive variance, but definitely a stronger historical fiction and just weaker thrillers and sci-fi. I guess for thrillers, I also tend to be a bit more stingy with ratings. I would really take a lot for me to rate a thriller 10 out of 10, for instance. So I think that's part of it as well. In terms of genre breakdown, I don't necessarily have any specific goals in mind. One thing that I would like to read more of is nonfiction. I used to read way more than this nonfiction. For some reason, this year, I haven't been quite in the mood. I wouldn't mind at least having 10% of nonfiction, at least 10-15 ideally. So we'll see how it goes. I'm still not going to have a hard quota or anything like that, but I wouldn't mind to see that yellow slice increase a little bit next year. And then I wanted to look at the release date for the books that I read. I have a few very arbitrary buckets, if you like, but so one is new releases for 2021. I have 19%, so almost a fifth. And then I have recent releases between 2018 and 2020, 29%. And then books published between 2010 and 2017, 14%. And then books published in the 2000s, 15%. And then books published before the year 2000, 23%. So almost a quarter. But much more interestingly is the ratings that I gave on average to all of these books. So anything published after year 2000, on average, all these ratings were between 7.8 and 8.2. So pretty high, like a solid 4-star rating. Books published before the year 2000, on average, I rated 6.1, so about 3 stars. That's quite a big gap, I have to say, and quite a surprise that I was not expecting, because even though I know that sometimes I don't necessarily enjoy classic books if they're a bit too dry or a bit too wordy or anything like that, I never really have the impression that I really dislike them or anything like that. So it was quite enlightening to see, like on paper like that, to see that stark difference between these different buckets in terms of ratings. When it comes to goals for 2022, I don't necessarily have anything in mind. I still want to read a good amount of new releases. I enjoy getting arcs from publishers as well. I like reading books when I know nothing about them and no one has reviewed them. But also I still want to keep reading some classics. So I'm hoping that the rating for the classic books here is going to go up ideally for 2022, but I don't necessarily have a specific breakdown in mind. And then I was really interested to look at my geographical breakdown. And here I'm going by the nationality of the author of the book. So my most populated bucket here is the UK. So 42% of the books I read were by British authors, followed by the US, about a third, so 33%. And then other English-speaking countries, so Ireland, Canada, South Africa, Australia, 9%. The rest of Europe 6%, and rest of the world at 10%. Again, looking at the ratings, we have the US about average 7.6, and then UK and rest of Europe slightly lower 7.3, and other English-speaking countries and rest of the world slightly higher 8.4. Not a massive variability, but still interesting to see. This one, I have to say, is something that I really want to target more significantly, because I'm just even looking at these numbers, I realize how strong an influence I get from US culture and other US booktubers that I watch and so on. So, you know, I'm not American, I don't live in America, so I don't necessarily see a reason for having a book out of 3 by American authors. I think it's more reasonable to have like a home bias. So the fact that I'm reading more books by British authors kind of makes sense given that I live here. But I definitely want to read more by other European authors and rest of the world authors. So I really want to grow that side of the pie, if you like. I really want to have broader geographical diversification, because it's so easy to just end up reading the same things that everybody else is reading. And obviously I'm not going to have like hard quota or anything like that. If there's something that I want to read, I'm not going to go, oh, it's an American author, I'm not going to read it. Not at all. But I think I would like to make more of an effort to find out about more diverse authors in terms of their geography, which I think I'm a bit lacking, especially when it comes to Italian books. I think it's just shameful that I'm not reading anything. I think I only had 1 Italian book in the whole year. So I really want to make an effort to read more Italian and French as well. At least 1 a quarter for each, which is really not very much, but I haven't even been hitting that. So I really want to make more an effort on that front. That's all for today. I hope you guys like this video. Please give me a thumbs up. Join our Discord if you want to discuss anything with me or the community, or if you want to take part in our monthly read-alongs. The link is in the description box, and I'll see you the next time.